I'm Katie from The Littlest Thistle, and I'm here today to show you how I do applique as part of the Friendship Quilt Along with Amanda Herring Designs. So there are several different ways of doing applique. Firstly, there's the traditional method by hand, where you can take your project anywhere, whether it's by the pool in the summer or sitting out in the garden perhaps. But the other option is for those of us that either don't have the time to hand sew or have problems medically. So I have hypermobility syndrome and I get very bad RSI in my hands. So if I do a lot of hand sewing, it can put my hands out of action for weeks, which is not really ideal. So the option in that case is to look for an alternative. Use a machine to do what your hands would have done. So there's a couple of different ways of using machine applique. You can either go for the raw edge approach, so that means that you cut the shapes out without seam allowance and you just stitch them directly to your background. You can do this with or without interfacing, so there's stuff such as Bondaweb, which is double-sided fusible, and you can use that to stick something down. So I've got a pouch here which I've done that with. Because this is not going to be washed, I really wanted to make sure that the edges weren't going to get all frizzy and fluffy. So I used the Bondaweb method for this. If you're going to use it on a quilt that's going to get washed a lot, then there is a chance that the edges will get nice and fluffy, the glue washes out. And I always think that looks great on sort of baby quilts, things that are going to be dragged around and loved and not really a showpiece. But if you want something by machine that does end up as a showpiece that looks similar to hand applique, then we need to use a different method. And that's the method I'm going to be showing you today. So I'm going to start by showing you the tools you're going to need for this project. So first of all, how do I do the applique that looks like it's been needle turned? Well, for this I use a Fusible Interfacing. This stuff is called Cutaway Magic by Jenny Haskins, and it's fusible on one side, non-fusible on the other, and what it allows me to do is stitch the fabric to the interfacing, then cut a slit in the background, turn it inside out, and I've got a shape that's that looks like the edges have all been turned in neatly. There's no raw edges, but it also doesn't add a lot of bulk to the quilt. So this is super lightweight stuff. Very similar to the stuff you get when you buy new electronics, maybe in between the screen and the keyboard of a laptop, for example. So you'll be needing a roll of this. The next thing you'll be needing is a magic seam marker. So this is a 1/4 inch Quilters Wheel. That's possibly, if you're looking it up on Google, that would be the best thing to search for. This happens to be by Sewline, which is available in the UK, but I'm sure there are plenty of other options overseas as well. What this is this tiny little disc here, and you put your pencil in the middle and run it round the edge of a template. That gives you your additional 1/4 inch seam, because many applique templates come without seam allowance. That means that people can use it straight off for raw edge if they want to do it that way, or they can add the seam allowance to allow them to do the hand sewing. The next thing you're going to need, because this is for the Friendship Quilt Along, is the templates from Riley Blake and Amanda Herring Designs, and this is a whole set of plastic templates which will do the entire quilt. Now I'm just going to show you how to do one particular block today, but if you want to do the whole quilt, you will need the set. And finally, you're going to need a pair of scissors. So this helps you both when you're cutting it to turn through, and also if you've got curves like we have in this project, it'll help you snip the curves so that everything looks nice and neat when it's turned the right side out. So here's the fabric that I have chosen for this block. So I have a solid background piece. Now, when I was choosing the fabrics for this quilt, I didn't quite anticipate this block, so this is quite busy, but it will work because the whole quilt is quite busy. We also have a stem because we're doing the endurance block, and that's a set of leaves. And then I've got my two fabrics which I'm going to use to do the leaves. Okay, so now we've come to the bit where we're going to trace out the various pieces being used. So I'm going to start at one end of my piece of fabric here, take my little wheel so I know that I've got plenty of room around the edges here, and I'm going to trace out initially where the stitching line will be, and for this I'm going to use a friction pen. I know this can be quite controversial. This is not going to be seen, it's on the inside of the fabric. It will come out when it gets ironed, but if you are at all concerned about using friction pens on your quilts, then you can feel free to use another marking tool. I'm just checking, and it's a wee bit faint on this side, so I'm going to give another quick run round here just to make sure I can see where I'm stitching. And then I'm going to mark my cutting line. Now this doesn't have to be 100% accurate, it is only the cutting line, people aren't going to see it. And unlike in a quilt block, it's not going to be sewn onto anything, so it doesn't have to be 100% accurate. However, it is handy not to end up with a massive great seam allowance, so we're just going to trace around this. It depends, sometimes I find it easier to start in the middle, other times it is definitely easier to start at the end. Okay, so mark one side, and then we're going to mark the other side, like so, and there I am, happy with one. Okay, so I'll just repeat that all the way across, and in my best Blue Peter style. Here's one I prepared earlier, all the pieces marked out, all my seam allowances in there, and because I was making a number of these at a time, I made sure that I had marked up what each thing was for. So this is the empathetic block, and I've got that marked up there. The next thing I need to do is to cut out the piece of cutaway magic that's going to fit this. So it comes as 12 inches across. I'm not going to get the two pieces side by side on this, so I'm going to have to do one on top of the other and then just cut that out like so. And then I'll just sew them on together, and that will be us ready to go. The next step is going to be sewing the fabric to the interfacing. Now you may or may not be able to see this in the light, but the fusible side you want to have right sides together with the fabric. The reason for this is that when you turn it the right side out, that side will be backing side down, and you can then directly stick the applique pieces to the backing. If you do it the other way round, it would stick to the fabric, which would make it a slightly less puffy piece to stitch down, but then it's a bit free range around your backing fabric and you have to pin it in place, so I found it easier if I do it this way round. I use an applique foot so that I can see clearly down the middle here. My machine is a Brother, and it comes with this open-toed applique foot. Have a look and see whether you have one of these. I also have my needle in the centre so that I can stitch straight round the line. Okay, so because this is a curve, I don't go terribly quickly. And I always come to a stop at the point so that I can pivot round. Now my machine has an automatic needle down position on it. If yours doesn't, just make sure your needle is down before you try pivoting, otherwise you'll find that you have left your needle attached to a bit of thread and the fabric is wandering around all over the place. Not that I have done this, of course, to have given you this particular tip, but yes, just something to bear in mind. So I've done one side, now I'm going to come up the other. Okay, pivoting again and coming back to the centre. I find it easier to start and finish in the centre rather than at one of the points, because if you do it at the point can get a little bit bulky with the thread at the start and the end. So I'm just going to come back to the middle here. Okay. And that's my first one stitched down. And I'm going to just repeat that across all of the petals and then with the other piece of fabric as well. Okay, so now I've got all my leaves stitched together, all down on the cutaway magic. So I'm going to start cutting them out, and I'm going to follow the pencil lines that I created with the little quilter's wheel. So you could also do this bit with a rotary cutter if you felt you had good control to sort of whiz round. Okay, so here's the first one that we've cut out here, and what I'm going to do is to first of all cut off the tip, because we don't want lots of bulk in the fabric at the points. I'll do that at both ends. And then I'm going to make little snips all the way around for the curves. And when you're doing these snips, you're just going up to the seam line and no more. Be careful you don't cut through your stitches. Okay, let's get that out of the way. Okay, so now we've got all the pieces cut out here, and the next thing we need to do is turn them the right side out. So we're going to very carefully separate the interfacing from the fabric, and making sure they're separate, to make a little snip in the interfacing, and I'm just going to cut up towards the point here. Okay, and then you're going to turn all the way through. Get your leaf the right side out, and you can just use the tip of the scissors or a chopstick or something like that to just push it out, and I just like to run it round the seam just to make sure all of it is pushed out nicely. Okay, and there we have a leaf shape ready to go. Okay, so the one bit you'll have noticed that we haven't touched yet is the stem for the leaves in this pattern, and the reason for that is it's quite a narrow strip here, and if we were to try and sew that to the interfacing, it would end up with a very narrow tube to try and turn through. So what we're going to do is in fact follow the instructions in the pattern, and we're going to just lightly finger press it in half here, like so, and then we're going to fold the edges into the centre like that, and I'm just going to take my iron here and run it along. This little prim iron is perfect for this sort of job because it's very small and very good at bringing these things in. Okay. And that's it, all done there like that. And we're just going to fold the ends in as well, just so that we have no bits that are raw. So just going to give that a little bit of a press in here. And then repeat at the other end. And there we go. So that's the stem ready to go, and we're going to pin that onto the background now so that we can stitch in place. Right, so we're now going to pin the stem in place. So I'm going to take my background piece and I'm going to fold it in half and then just finger press it lightly so that I can find where the centre is. And then I'm going to take my stem and I'm going to pop it on here. Now, I chose to start mine ½ inch up, so I'm just going to grab my ruler here, pop it on the ½ inch line, and that's it there. And then just going to start pinning it from here. Trying to keep everything straight. And all those edges that we pressed tucked in. I just use these clover glass-headed pins because they're nice and fine, and I can also iron over them if I need to. But here's our stem ready to go, so now we can actually start stitching to the background. Now we're back at the machine, we're going to change the stitch type, and we're going to use a blanket type stitch for this. My machine lets me set the width of the stitch as well as the length. So I have set this to be quite small. It's only 1.5 millimeters width-wise, and length-wise I'm going for 1.8 millimeters. Again, I'm going to start in the middle, and I'm just going to pop my needle down there, and I'm going to slowly go along the side. So I want the lengthwise stitches to be on the background, and only the sideways ones to be coming onto the stem itself. I just stop when I come to each pin because otherwise it doesn't particularly like going over them. I don't mind going over them sideways, but lengthways is a bit awkward. It can be a wee bit tricky when you get to the end of these here. Just need to make sure that you're actually able to pivot on the background and not on the stem to make sure you get your sideways ones coming in again. It's not an absolute guarantee that you'll have everything lined up to be able to do that, but if you can manage it, it works great. So that one is coming in there, pivoting again, and off I go. And that's my stem all stitched in place, ready for the leaves to be added now. Back at the ironing mat again, it's time to start positioning our leaves in place, ready to be stitched. So my first set of leaves go on at 1.5 inches, and I've chosen to make mine meet in the middle of the stem. You can do whatever positioning you like. And my top ones are going to be right at the top of the stem up here. And I'm not too worried about measuring it perfectly in between. I just arrange it so that they all look like they're roughly the same angle and about the same distance apart. So I think that's good to go now. So back with the iron, we're just going to press each one of these in place, and I just hold it in place for a few seconds at a time just to make sure the glue has stuck. Right. If you're using a bigger iron, obviously you can get more of these at once, but I could only bring my little one through here for this. Okay, so I'm happy with my placement now, and I'm ready to stitch all the leaves down. And I'm going to be stitching those down in exactly the same way as the stem. I'll start at the tip of each leaf, work my way round, using exactly the same stitch. And here we have our finished empathetic block with all the leaves sewn down. I hope you enjoyed stitching along with me today. Feel free to check out my YouTube channel for other tips and techniques, or my blog, which is on www.thelittlestthistle.com. Thanks, bye!